Science Center. And I'm just doing real quick, signing people in. Anyway, so like I said, my name is Maureen Zieber. I'm the director here at the Iron Hill Museum and Science Center. If anyone has ever been here before, thank you for coming and visiting. Otherwise, hopefully you guys can make it in the future to come and visit us at some point. So if you could please see our contact information. We'll have it here and then as well have it at the end. All right, so the discussion we're having today is the Mid-Atlantic Indigenous Past and Present. So in dealing with the Indigenous people of past and present, I wanted to thank you all firstly for the opportunity, and then I'm glad to be here. In regards to the historical information of lifeways movement of Indigenous people, as well as some current information as to what is happening in the region today with descendants and the current culture and identity, it is a lot of information to get through. So I would like to formally introduce myself at this time. If I can slideshow to like me, there we go. So this is a slide just to introduce me officially and my name in language. If you were to put my name in Lenape, it's Nula Wensi Maureen Zieber, which is you can call me Maureen Zieber. In Oneida, it's Maureen Zieber Nyungets, which is Maureen Zieber, you can call me. All right, so and I am Nanticoke Lenape Oneida descent. Now, in regards to the family picture that you see to the right of the screen, I'm the person wearing the purple. My mom is sitting in between my sibling and I. We are in our traditional clothing. Our traditional clothing is Oneida. What we have is what's called longhouse dresses. So those longhouse dresses are a contact period era style clothing. But what we have on is indicative of Victorian era onwards to longhouse dresses, traditional clothing. We're also carrying fans of eagle feathers, and we also have wampum on us as well. So just wanted to let you know all that. Now, there is typically an opening prayer that the Oneida normally have. And it's usually something called the Gani Gahaga. And the Gani Gahaga is the words before you say all else. And it brings everyone into a mindset where they can all focus on what we want to accomplish today. So in respect to this, what we want to accomplish is knowledge. And it is basically what's called the words of Thanksgiving. And in the words of Thanksgiving, what we want to do is constantly think about all the things that are in creation and how creation is helping us. And all of our minds are one. We're all in this together to all learn and to kind of educate each other and as well as ourselves to this process. So Lenape is a lot easier to say it because the Gayan Gahaga is pages and pages long. But Lenape, I tend to like to use that one a lot more. Now, the Lenape one is Kisha Leme Yon Kinaka Hinan Wanishi, which is Creator Watch Over Us. Thank you. It's easy, straight to the point, and I like it a lot more because it's really simple. Now, the wampum belt on this page links directly to William Penn and the Lenape in Pennsylvania. It was one of several given during what's called the walking purchase, which was done in the 16 and 1700s. It was mostly done by William Penn's children, which is early 1700s, and it records the conditions on which the Lenape ceded a certain tract of their territory to the Europeans. The belt is known as the Delaware Land Belt, and I can talk more about that later if we get a chance to, because we do have a lot to kind of slog through. Now, the wampum belt, I will say, this wasn't the only, but a number of belts that was given to William Penn on behalf of the indigenous people that met in Sacamaxon Park, which is in Philadelphia today. Now, before we get started on the rest of the stuff, I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't thanking the Iron Hill Museum and Science Center. We are open Tuesdays through Fridays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Saturdays, noon to 4. We are a natural history museum in our new building. That's all the nature stuff. And what we do have is our original building, which was built in 1923 as a schoolhouse for African American children. Those children had a schoolhouse which was part of the DuPont experiment, which was 90 plus schools built in Delaware for African American and Native American students. Less than 90 will remain at this current point. So Iron Hill being the best original condition, only because we're a nonprofit. Nonprofit normally means no money. So what we are actually able to do is just maintain the original floors, walls, you name it, as best as we can for the betterment of the building. So let me go and just talk really quickly. I might go back for a real quick second to this slide and say I want to give our land acknowledgement that the Iron Hill Museum took a while to get together and decide on, because I had to educate the board of directors on what a land acknowledgement is, and I will talk very briefly on what a land acknowledgement is once we cycle through the presentation. Now, our land acknowledgement is we recognize that the Iron Hill Museum and Science Center, which is owned by the Delaware Academy of Science Incorporated, sits on the ancestral land of the Lenape Nation. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Lenape people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the Academy's relationships to Native peoples. So let us quickly look at where the Lenape and Nanticoke were before contact, period. We're setting our baseline with this information. So with both terms, Nanticoke and Lenapehoking, they're actually contemporarily used to discuss a homeland that was ancestral to both tribal nations. Nanticoke has been used locally, but Lenapehoking is a well-known word that is steeped in a history it never had. Coined by Nora Thompson Dean in the early 1970s, is used to describe present Lenape land versus original Lenape land. And just the word Lenapehoking itself is a perfect word to use for those original lands. Both nations were and are proud, strong, and determined people everywhere they end up post-contact period. So that's post like 1600s onwards. These lands supplied everything needed and wanted by the people, no matter their community names or clans or unifying language bases. Please know that the Lenape is an umbrella name for all of those that have similar cultural practices, language, religious ideals, and traditional political leanings. I tend to talk about both the Nanticoke and Lenape together when discussing larger concepts, such as movement from traditional locations to the governmental holdings that were created to deal with the Indian problem, is how the government would state it at that time. When giving more details, I speak just about the Lenape. Now, with the Lenape, people spoke different dialects of the language, known as Unami and Munsee, respectively, and had different customs depending upon where they were. We're going to talk about the Lenape as a whole, but when needed, I will mention how Delaware Lenape are doing things differently. So this map just gives you an idea of those homelands. Now, in regards to cultural heroes, these modern cultural heroes is Lucy Parks Blaylock and Nora Thompson Dean. Both women were instrumental with documenting Lenape culture, from language and song to dance and food and religion. Now, both women are Delaware and live in Oklahoma. If we didn't have these two women and their hard work among the elders and information keepers of the Delaware, recognized tribes of the Delaware, Tribe of Oklahoma, and the Delaware Nation, in Oklahoma, certain aspects of the Unami language culture would be mostly wiped out today. They produced the pathway for others to follow their lead. Now, with moving on, why is there such thing as a land acknowledgement, and why should we do it? A land acknowledgement, in essence, is a formal agreement that recognizes Native people as the first stewards of the land. The purpose is to educate about and give respect to those Indigenous people, as well as rise and raise awareness to Indigenous stories, histories, experiences, perspectives, and voices that are far too often suppressed or forgotten. The land acknowledgement can be read aloud at the beginning of events such as published online or printed materials. So pretty much what I did is I gave it verbally as our land acknowledgement. Now, before, I know a lot of students at like the high school level, they're starting to hear these buzzwords of land acknowledgement and why should they be doing it. So for students, before they start working on it, they should ask the questions such as, why am I doing a land acknowledgement? And a land acknowledgement, if you are hoping to inspire others to take action to support indigenous communities, you're on the right track. If you're delivering a land acknowledgement out of guilt or because everyone else is doing it, more self-reflection is in order. Yes, they are becoming a common thing to do, and if you are not mindful of what you are doing, then you are turning a land acknowledgement into a token action. It becomes an empty gesture to honor Indigenous people and becomes this century mascot or society pressured thing to do. And that's not something we want to fall upon. Now, what is my end goal? Is another question that students could have. What do you hope your listeners will do after hearing the acknowledgement? If you're wondering what a land acknowledgement is, it is opening remarks that say the land of the event is the homeland of a specific Native nation. It is meant to create awareness. You never do a land acknowledgement in the past tense. This kind of gives the idea that Indigenous people are in the past, they're just a history book kind of statistic, and that's not what Indigenous people are. Indigenous people are thriving people who adapt and adopt things to be able to survive, to go to the next generation. It is important to recall a balanced account of history. That means the good with the bad. It is doing research and knowing that a tribe is not all the same in one area, from one area to another area. Now, for the museum, not only do we have a statement, but we also have information on what one is, because we want to educate what is a land acknowledgement and why or why not you should do it. And then we describe how our organization helps Indigenous populations through education and our annual powwow. We give links to some videos that we have made, as well as a way to look up your own area to see which people are located where you live and work to begin your own research and acknowledgement if you choose to do so. Now, a welcome to country is a little bit different. You already have your land acknowledgement. There isn't a Native person at your event at all. You're good to go. But if you come to an event and there happens to be an Indigenous person there, you don't put them on the spot and say, hey, can you give a few words? You approach them ahead of time and say, we understand that you're an Indigenous person, you're a descendant of Indigenous people that were from here. Is there a way that you could say some words? Because this is a chance for something to be said directly from an Indigenous person about the land that you're on and the meaning and the sentiment shifts of that event. This gives a voice to the Indigenous people in your community and involving them directly. This is called the Welcome to Country and is performed by an Indigenous member of the tribe or group who are custodians where the event is taking place. They may deliver a short speech, either in English or in their language, or a little bit of both, acknowledging the audience and welcoming them to the land. The speech might include a ceremony or an exchange of gifts. Don't be surprised if there is an exchange of gifts. And protocol dictates that they should be compensated for their time. That compensation could be a gift of an item or of food or of money, just to state to them, thank you for doing this, because we know that you are descendants of the people who lived here before contact period. Now, the image is Nora Thompson Dean in a classroom. That classroom happened to be back in the 1970s in Valley Forge. So Nora Thompson Dean did get a chance to make it all the way over to the East Coast a number of times to see where her pre-contact ancestors came from, which I think is amazing. Now, if we look at this, this is a good example of why lumping all the Lenape together is not normally a fantastic thing to do. Each label that you see here is a different community, and each community had its own name, and each name represented a family or a number of families that gathered together and lived in certain areas. So with a little more explanation on Lenape being an umbrella term for people, this map, minus a somewhat outdated name, which depends upon the indigenous person you talk to. Some people prefer the term American Indians. A lot of those people are American Southwest. They really don't mind if you use American Indian. For me, I prefer Native American or Indigenous American, or just Indigenous or just Native. But it varies from region to region. So it's not a one size fits all kind of answer. Now, this is just a sampling of the different sites of people that are considered Lenape. Each name describes their location or connection to the land, or with the more English sounding ones, names that are given by them to them by scholars or colonists trying to categorize them. So, for example, Raritan, that's a Lenape word. Sacamaxon is a Lenape word. But then you see in there things that are not Lenape. So that is just a kit like Little Scasoni, or the I can't find a Rockaway. So those are words that are given to the indigenous people just as like placeholders by colonists. Say, okay, these are the people who are in this location. Now, each group is an independent entity that has kinship ties or historical roots with the other people around them. So now we are left with questions. One, what ends up happening to these people that causes so many of them to be uprooted from their traditional homelands to their current locations? Many scholars discuss displacement due to disease. European encroachment goes hand in hand with that. There's also a constant shift of power to more aggressive immigrants. Two, what are their current locations? And three, what changed for those people as they moved? To answer that, we look at individuals and group histories. That might include oral history, archaeology, which is the study of humans and their stuff, primary resources like diaries and deeds and written treaties, and secondary sources like history books and newspapers and websites. Now, before we get started in all of that, we have to go to beginnings. So the beginning is, what is it looking like? And each time period is going to differ locally depending upon where you are. So the American Southwest, we're not going to have the same kind of time periods like the people on the East Coast have, right? So ours is really simply called things like Paleo-Indian, Archaic, Woodland 1, Woodland 2, Contact Period, and Historical Archaeology. Everything that is penned out that way to show different time periods is because of a change in technology. And the change the change in technology, there we go, is dependent upon the type of things that make the living of those indigenous people either easier or changed enough that it marks a difference. Now, for Paleo-Indian period people, those people are having crude tools. So think of just like spears and knife blades that are just really crudely made. Those people's technology are looking at like megafauna, and they're mainly nomadic people. So that's what they're doing. They're mainly nomadic and they're doing their thing. The Archaic period is where a tool called atlatls are added. The Archaic period with atlatls, it gives the indigenous people more distance between them and their food. So if they're hunting bear or deer, they can be farther away from those bears and deers because they have that added tool of the atlatl, which pushes the spear faster and farther than just throwing it with their hands. So that's the main tool, that technology that is added during the Archaic period. Woodland 1, at the end of Archaic to the beginning of Woodland 1, that's where you start to see the establishment of what we recognize as the Lenape people. Environmental changes cause plant gathering to increase. You've got toolkits which shift from stone bowls to ceramic bowls and clay pots. And you also have more efficient cooking that way. If you upgrade your kitchen tools, then your food is going to increase with its like nutritional values or its differences. Like you're not stuck cooking corn the same way over and over and over again, type of thing. With Woodland 2, the technology that starts to slip in is bows and arrows. If you notice, Paleo, Archaic, Woodland 1, you've got thousands and thousands of years. They don't have bows and arrows. They're only focused with atlatls and spears as their main hunting tools. Now, with Woodland 2, the technology is coming from the West, and they're starting to adapt to have a more intensified use of food storage pits and increased populations of many different types of animals, and they themselves, the number populations of Lenape people are starting to grow. And so you have a flourishing of many different types of hunting techniques. So it's not, atlatls and spears aren't like the only game tool at this point. Now it's bows and arrows. Now, this is only a 600-year period, and it's quickly shifting into contact period. And that's where the use of guns and ammo start to come in. You have also the use of Delaware as a descriptor for people, land, and landmarks. Delaware Lenape populations decreased due to disease and violent conflicts between the indigenous people and the non-indigenous people, kind of warring against each other. With historical archaeology from 1630 to the 1940s, that's where you're starting to see relocations, permanent European settlements. So everything starts a domino effect in this regard. Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot. But if we look at these things such as what Woodland 1 and Woodland 2 look like for Lenape people, we look at these images, and these are structures that you can see in person. The 1719 museum has a longhouse, and they talk a little bit about the Lenape people, but what they kind of lack in is describing exactly where longhouses are being used by Lenape people. The Lenape people are the ones living in longhouses that have larger families. They're living in villages, and they're closer, like mid-Pennsylvania all the way up to New York, and in chunks of New Jersey. Now, the Delaware-centered people lived in wigwams and small family clusters of 10 to 20 people. Now, the second image is at the Museum of the American Indian in Allentown, Pennsylvania. That, I don't know if they still have that up, but that picture was taken by them a number of years ago. That it was built by indigenous people with, I believe, a Boy Scout troop, or a Boy Scout trying to become an Eagle Scout. I think it was one of those things. But he worked with indigenous people to get the project done. And you can find out if Allentown, the Museum of the American Indian in Allentown, still has it or not. Hopefully they do, because it was a really nice exhibit a number of years ago. Now, anyway, with pre-contact, You've got gathering, semi-nomadic people are the ones who are living in Delaware. Now, we are in the historical traditional region of the Southern Unami, which is the language and dialect located in Delaware, like Pennsylvania, the southern end of New Jersey. Everywhere up, you could see a smattering of both Unami and Muncie, but the higher you go around Upper New Jersey and Lower New York and Upper Pennsylvania, you're going to deal with Muncie language, which is it's Lenape, but the accent is different. Some words are different. So it's like American English, but different on region, right? We're all speaking English, but our slang words, some of our terms that we use are different from region to region. It's the same kind of idea. Now, this is just really quick information about what men and women and children are doing. Now, a lot of the information at the museum focuses on Woodland 1 and Woodland 2 periods. Men, women, and children had jobs or responsibilities to keep the family successful, and these jobs were not just done by only men or only women. Women also hunted, and men also cooked. Those jobs were also extended to the children, and the kids would also fill in where they were needed. So all of those jobs were very important for the village to keep going, or the family units to keep going, because remember, not all Lenapes lived in villages. So the image next to the words is the credit goes to the Delaware tribe of Oklahoma, and they use it to describe how Lenapes were previous to relocation. Yeah. Now, I loosely use the term kitchen here. Most cooking areas are going to be the same with fire, stone, and wood bowls, clay pots, and a lot of ash. Both ash was used for cooking, but also sometimes used in the food, depending upon what the food was. But the foods are different depending upon what you're talking about. So a lot of the crawfish and the clams and the mussels and the lobster and fish and all those crustaceans, that makes sense if you're Lenape in Jersey, New York, along the coastlines, in Delaware. It doesn't make sense if you're Lenape and you're only in a river type of situation or a lake situation, but you don't have crawfish and mussels and lobsters and crabs. And it also doesn't make sense for Lenape and Delaware to have the squash and the pumpkins. So, like I said, Lenape kitchen is loosely used. There we go. Since the Lenape are all different, that means the kitchens are all going to be different as well. Now, Lenape took full advantage of the abundant resources of Lenapehokan. In the north, large communities farmed crops and gathered other plant materials. The communities were large and they used a mixture of wigwams and longhouses. Similar buildings called big houses were used for important meetings, and some ceremonies would be held there as well. And the Lenape never farmed in Delaware because of the population of people were so small. The gathering naturally growing plants gave them all that they needed. They lived in small family groups and wigwams over multiple generations. So when we see archaeological digs, what we're seeing is overlapping of the house posts, just over and over and over again, just slightly shifted from one generation to another, but they're all in the same location, which I think is pretty cool. Now, with the Lenape, they're gathering and harvesting, and what they're gathering and harvesting is many different types of nuts and berries and mushrooms. There's different types of plants that are medicinal plants that can be used for medicine, as well as to deal with harmful effects of things. So, like I said in the presentation earlier, if you were with me this morning, the Lenape women were the ones that knew how to heal as well as harm. So she was the doctor, so to speak. All women knew the different plants. The only time that you were going to a medicine person would be if the illness it couldn't be shaken by the plants your mom gave you. Otherwise, you're just relying on your mom and her knowledge of the plants. Now, one example of a plant that was taken that was multifaceted is moss. It is used in moss bags, which is basically like a sling where you put like moss and cattail fluff in there, and that kind of you can hang your baby in the moss bag, and the baby while you're working, and you don't want the baby to like crawl all over the place and get lost somewhere. You just hang them on yourself like a little sling or a backpack, or you hang them up somewhere where he's in the bag that you could keep watch on your kid and not have to worry about the kid crawling off somewhere and you're not being able to find the kid later. They're also used as sponges and to apply paint, and also really good use for in bandages. Now, where Lenape are farming, this is not in Delaware. The traditional farming done pre-contact is looked at in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. And the three most important crops were corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters. Now, pumpkins, tobacco, and sunflowers were also grown. Okay, those are also traditional crops. Lenape people cultivated crop species and grew varieties. Now, in the list, there I gave like 2 different types of corn, but there was actually like 6 different kinds of corn. There was several different kinds of squash, several different kinds of beans, and there's listed at the bottom of this slide, there's actually 2 different sources that if you really want to have a traditional Lenape garden, you could get from those 2 seed companies. And those 2 seed companies are regional to this location. Because if you get a whole bunch of types of corn and they're actually grown in Oklahoma, I don't know how they're going to grow in Delaware, because our region and our climate and our zone is different. So you want to get zone as close as possible as you can to where you live. So the one in Glen Mills, PA, the True Love Seeds, that's gonna be your best bet, because they're like right up the road if you really want to do a corn, squash, and bean Three Sisters garden, even though it wasn't something that was done by Lenape in Delaware until contact period. But hey, the gardens are cool and kids love them. Now, still dealing with Lenape community, flint knapping, and what we have is arrowheads versus spearheads. Remember, spearheads were thousands of years versus the arrowhead, which was only about 700, well, 600 years, depending upon who you're talking to in regards to the archaeologist, the person who uses a scientific study to figure out where tools are starting to pop in. Hunting and trapping. Lenape are using hunting and trapping for bears and deer. That's the hunting animals. They're using that atlatl and spear. That's how it's used. That is what it looks like when you hold it in a hand, just the atlatl. Atlatl is not a Lenape word. So I don't know if any of you ever thought that atlatl was a Lenape word. It is not. It is actually from a language from Mesoamerica called Nahuatl. It's chosen by archaeologists in the Western Hemisphere, which is North and South America, because that is where they believe the first people using atlatls and spears are coming from. The technology starts in Mesoamerica and kind of just blooms upward from the Mesoamerica all the way up to Canada, and then also Mesoamerica all the way down through to the bottom of South America. So that's where they believe, that's where it comes from, is these people speaking the Nahuatl language. Okay. Now, trapping, you're trapping smaller animals, such as like rabbits and raccoons and foxes and squirrels and everything like that. Fish, all things like that. And that is just a really quick view as to what a trap would look like. This little thing over here is a fishware. So nets, yeah, I mean, you can use nets to corral the fish towards the fishware, but the fishware was the primary way to get fish at a big volume because it's a stationary object. Fish can go in, but they can't figure their ways back out. So fish wares are used a lot. And I think, if I remember correctly, Brandywine Springs still has areas where there is remnants of ancient fish wares, which I think is fascinating. So there's that. Now you have nets that are used. They will have sinkers on them, and that helps the nets sink down. And most fishing was done by trapping and the fish and gathering them, like I said already. Yep. And then for the Lenape, what they're doing is they are recording their history through wampum. They're not, they don't have a written word. Okay. So the one way that they did that was through patterns made with whelk, which is like that curly shell, as well as the quahog, which is the purple shell. Now, all of these are all handmade beads, okay? And it's not that easy to do. So it gets a little bit pricey. It's kind of expensive if you wanted something like that for your classroom. That's why a lot of artists today that work with quahog, they tend to use glass or clay, because real quahog and real whelk, it's about $7 to $15 for one bead, not a string, just one bead. So, like I said, there's companies that make facsimiles that look pretty good from a distance. Now, these patterns were put in a type of structure that looks like a belt. Now, these aren't the type of belts that you would wear. Some you can make them to wear, but the ones that have treaties involved, the ones that were agreements between tribes, the ones that were adoptions, and ones that were giving credence to someone who passed away, all of those are not to be worn. So there's decorative ones that you can wear, but also history recorded ones that you don't wear. You just pull them out and let people read them, so to speak. But every record-keeping wampum belt came with a story, and you had to memorize the story. So not only do we have belts today, but we don't know what they mean, because the story died along with the person who made the belt for whatever treaty it was. And that person either passed away due to relocation and then not making it to Oklahoma or Texas or Arkansas or Canada, or they just stopped talking about it because it was safer not to talk about it. All right, now we go into contact period. And contact period, you have what's called the first land push. If we only were to focus on mid-Atlantic region, then we first notice European contact in this area around the 1610s through the 1630s. Now, who were these people? Now, that would be the Swedish and the Dutch. According to the Swedish and the Dutch records, they bought land from people identified as Lenape near Wilmington, Delaware, in 1638. We call that area the New Sweden Center. It's also where the Kalmar nickel tends to be tethered in for the winter time at dock. And so therefore, what I included was a little sign over here talking about New Sweden, and that just gives like literally a little bloop as to the history of New Sweden in Delaware. Now, the breakdown happens right around this time, because the Lenape and the Swedish and the Dutch are dealing with language barriers. And one language barrier was the Swedish thought they bought land. In reality, the Lenape said, if you need to live somewhere, you are more than welcome to use this as long as we can use it too. So they're saying, yeah, we can both use it. That's totally fine. And the Swedish are hearing, we're just going to keep this land. This is all ours now because we bought it. It's not the case. So that's where, unfortunately, all language starts to like unravel, and that's where you get a lot of wars that end up starting to happen, is all during this contact and first land push periods, because of misunderstandings of the intent of what land is worth, quote unquote, versus what the land use is going to be. Now, the image of the sign below, that is going with what is known as the site of Fort Casimir, that's in Delaware City. And this is just giving you a really quick viewpoint that, what, it's not Delaware City? Old Newcastle, my apologies, Old Newcastle. And that site is now underwater, actually. So both signs, when I took this picture, New Sweden, it was no big deal. I got out of my car real quick and then jumped back in my car. But Fort Casimir sign is on the side of somebody's house. So that was really uncomfortable for me to get out of the car and take a picture of this while the man was working in his garden. So my apologies to the guy who was looking at me strange because I was taking pictures of his house. But in reality, I was taking pictures of the sign so I could use it in presentations, and that was it. Now, when we begin to see Lenape and Nanticoke movement with some families underway during this time, it was all during the 1600s. Now, those people are starting to move because they're starting to see basically the writing on the wall, so to speak. They don't think Europeans are going to stop coming, and they want to stay as traditional as long as possible. So they wanted to continue traditional lifeways without interference from the unknown that the Swedish and Dutch are bringing with them. Now, who is coming after the Swedish and the Dutch? They start to cycle out, go other places, and the English start to cycle in. The most famous of a positive Lenape-English interaction is with English Quaker William Penn. In 1682, it is said that he met with Lenape Turtle Clan leader Tamminen, and Tamminen does have a statue right next to the 95 North on-ramp in Philadelphia off of right near Chestnut Street, I think. I think it's Chestnut Street. So if you blink, you missed him, but it's a beautiful statue. Anyway, the meeting was to negotiate land usage. Notice I said usage, not ownership, usage and political maneuvering regarding the relationships between Penn's people and the Lenape under Tamminen. This became known as the Treaty of Saxe-Maxen, but also called the Great Treaty or Penn's Treaty. And a written document was drawn up by William Penn, and Tamminen had a series of wampum belts made to document the Lenape of keeping records and agreement. Now, what's interesting is that there is no firm proof on William Penn's side, which means there's no legal paperwork, that he is said to have supposedly been to this. But there's oral histories from both his family as well as the Lenape families that were there that this event actually did happen. So the belt depicted here is the popular known as the Penn Treaty belt, depicts two people on a field of white with a series of purple angled stripes. Several meanings for this belt exists. One is the lines are to represent the rivers in Philadelphia, and one person is supposed to symbolize William Penn, and the other person is to symbolize the Lenape shaking hands in agreement over the usage of the land. Now, the painting that we see, that we know very well of, was painted almost 50 to 60 years after William Penn passed away. One of his sons was the one that commissioned, it was Thomas, I think, commissioned the painting to be done to kind of document that this thing happened. And look, we are a good family. We did to celebrate with the Lenape. But at that point, the clothing was different. So also what's going on with this time period, we have the Lenape people that are representatives here, but they didn't know the traditional clothing of Lenape people by the time this painting was done, so they just took guesses. So a lot of art rendering and poetic justice for the type of things that were done in the painting from the idea of the artist, not that it was actually properly researched at all in the mid 1700s. Now, we do know that during the walking purchase, um, according to popular records and legends, the Lenape leaders, under the direction of Lepawosi, which was the two chiefs after Tamanin, made an agreement with the Penn family that the amount of walking done in a day and a half by a selected person would be lands that the family would be able to use, not take, but use. What ends up happening is a land grab of over 1 million acres. 3 men known for their speed were hired to run a full day and a half, and when they were done, sheriffs from surrounding colonies drew up boundary lines with previously approved maps from the day's results. So that's how Pennsylvania came to be. Now, knowing that's how Pennsylvania came to be, the walking purchase is all of that stuff in that corner up here. So it's a building block. It's a constant building block. So by the time William Penn comes in, they have all this here and this here. This is the walking purchase addition, and then just keeps going and going and going and going with time periods. And the last little bit being all the way up here by the Great Lakes in 1792. I just wanted everyone to see the development of Pennsylvania with the beginning of the saga of the feat of William Penn. Just over 100 years later, the entire state was complete and owned no longer by indigenous people. Each time indigenous people are either absorbed or assimilated, they succumb to disease and war, or are moved ever northward or westward. A couple of well-known wars happened during this time, such as the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War, and each time the indigenous people feel the full weight of change. Now, this is a map in progress on where we think Lenapehoking, where the people end up. And I say a map in progress because there are a lot more communities that did not make it to this map, but that's only because of lack of documentation in several locations. Instead, it might be just documentation for one library that might have like a citation that's like really wildly out there. But for the most part, this is where everything is. This is where everyone ends up. It gets even worse as time progresses, and that swath of that big, huge swath of yellow starts to shrink smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, forced removal versus assimilation. With forced removal versus assimilation, you have some Lenape groups that decide to stay in the location of where they are able to hide, such as the Nanticoke Lenape Nation of New Jersey, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, and the Rompano Lenape Indian Nation, as well as the state-recognized Lenape outside of Dover, Delaware. Everyone else, they start to break up and move into other locations. The green pathway is up into Canada. They go by way of Iroquois people. The Lenape are close friends and relations to the Oneida people, and so they go up through Oneida, and then they find their way into Canada. And this is where the Delaware Nation of Moravian Town is. The Munsee Delaware Nation of Ontario, they come south of Maryland, and then they're forced up into Canada. The Munsee are being taken from the upper New Jersey and lower New York and eastern Pennsylvania and forced out to Wisconsin. The Unami Lenape, you've got the one group going all the way over to Missouri, then down through Arkansas, Texas, and up to Oklahoma. But then you've got the other Lenape, which stop in Indiana, then Missouri, and then you've got Kansas, and then Oklahoma. So those two histories are very different. And it changes the Lenape. So by the time the two federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma stop moving, they are vastly different. Their languages are still similar, but their histories start to diverge because their loss is different. Their mourning is different. Mourning as in the death of some of their culture, their language, their people. This is where a lot of indigenous people pop into the Ohio River Valley through 1795 through the 1840s. If you notice, like right in the middle here, you have Delaware. That means that's the Lenape. And you also have Nanticoke. They literally named their towns Delaware and Nanticoke because what they're doing is moving. And if they want their future generations to find them, all they have to do is go back and find the towns named after their tribes, which I think is a fantastic idea. That's just another viewpoint, so you can see how that forced removal is happening during those different time periods and decades, how people are moving from one location to another. And then this is the groups of where they end up in Canada. So all the Lenape, all the different tribal groups all over the Canada. But if you look over here, right here, we have the town of Nanticoke. So that tells you right there, Nanticoke did make it up to Canada because they were following in the footsteps of the Lenape as they were leaving the area. Whoever didn't stay behind, the ones that moved, they were moving and naming towns after themselves so their families could find them after the fact. Now, hiding in plain sight pretty much means you're trying to pass for someone else so you can remain as a living, breathing person, and only using your culture when you can and when it's safe to do so. Every person here, except for up here, this is a statue of Taman, that's the one in Philly. It all starts with him interacting with Europeans, but everyone here, if you look, they all look different because the Lenape are not just, they don't just look one way. The Lenape people look many different ways, and they all share the same love and drive to remain as indigenous people in a world where it was very difficult and illegal to do so until the 1920s. The 1920s, indigenous people were allowed to vote. They were finally allowed to be United States citizens, and then finally they were able to have religious freedoms. But that's only in the 1960s, 70s, 1970s, let me correct myself. The 1970s, when indigenous people were allowed to have freedom of religion. Everyone else had that freedom, but indigenous people, we had to work for it for many generations. And it took a lot of time for the government to catch up with everybody else. So land acknowledgement do, I guess that's how the French say it, right? To conclude your thoughts and feelings on where we are and who was and is here now, it takes time to connect in a meaningful way and to truly understand. And you can help by giving room to Indigenous people when they are at an event to speak. You can read books, listen to music and lectures, watch movies, buy items directly from Indigenous people. Native inspired is not Native friendly. Doing research to know that Indigenous people are still thriving, making waves, and not your Hollywood stereotype. Being an ally is integral for success for all communities, and sharing what you learn is incredibly important. So this is just a really quick GIF so you can see from starting from contact period all the way up to the present day where Indigenous homelands are versus the allowed places where Indigenous people are. All that blue's gone. By 2010, it's very, 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 very little. So that it's this GIF is a sobering type of map that really shows the close decimation of Indigenous people, and how we were able to maintain some semblance of culture and language and traditions is almost close to being a miracle. So just to wrap up, I wanted to say Wanishi, which is the Unami dialect way of saying thank you, Yalkal, which is Oneida way of saying thank you, well, a version of thank you, which is actually to you, thanks. Uh, if you have any questions, you can give me a call. You can give me an email. I'm always happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Uh, so I know that we're out of time, but I hope that you guys learned a lot of stuff and you enjoyed learning what you did learn. Thank you, question mark. Oh, maybe it's a exclamation point meant. Thank you so much. Trying to find, is there a special sign in needed for this? I have no idea. I have no idea. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a little bit confusing for a hot second, but we're good. So yeah, like I said, if anyone has any questions, um, by all means, please ask now or at some point in the future. No questions. And I try to go as fast as possible. I didn't mean to sound like an auctioneer if I did, but the history of this location is so big. It's so hard to talk about in just 1 hour. Or in this case, it's supposed to be 50 minutes, but you know how I do. I squeak it. Okay, there's only 10 of us left. So, hey, Sue, if you're there, you can stop recording now. Okay, well, I'm gonna leave. So hopefully everyone has a really good rest of your weekend. Well, the beginning of your weekend. And like I said, contact me anytime. Thank you so much. Take care.